Hello everyone and welcome to Blue Tengu's live game development show, where we show everything that goes into making a game from concept to completion. If you've ever wanted to make a game, we hope this will help lower the barrier to entry, maybe give you the nudge you needed to try it yourself. Even if you don't want to make a game, we hope you'll find some value in what we're doing here, at least some entertainment. All of the information about where you can find us is in the Twitch info down below for those of you who are watching us live, or in our YouTube profile for those of you who are catching us later. But just in case, we're at www.bluetengu.com, btengu on Twitter, facebook.com, Blue Studio, all one word, youtube.com, Blue Studio, all one word, for those of you who are watching the live stream, and Twitch TV, Blue Tengu, for those of you who are watching us on YouTube and might want to catch us later on well, let's see, Japanese Saturday morning, so Friday evening for those of you in the States. If you missed the last couple of episodes, you can catch them over at YouTube, but you shouldn't have any trouble following along even if you haven't seen them. For those of you who haven't seen the show on Twitch or YouTube before, my name's Eric. I'm a game designer living in Japan, who's trying to show you everything that's going into making a game for about 2 hours a week, including all of the ums and ahs and awkward debugging moments that pop up. The reason I'm showing it all, as opposed to making the game first and doing a tutorial based on that, is if it's not rehearsed, then I think it'll help lower the barrier you feel towards making a game, because you can see me getting stuck in different places and whatnot, and I think that just makes it easier to go out and try it yourself, as opposed to seeing someone who's already figured everything out, just kind of breeze through it. Thank you to everyone who dropped by last week, and to all of those who watched the video on YouTube or past videos. For those of you who are here with me on Twitch, feel free to drop suggestions or ask me questions at any time. I may not be able to answer them right away, but I'll try to get to them. And if I can't, please send me a message or leave a comment on our site or YouTube video later, and I'll do my best to address it next time. If any of you out there are making something and you don't mind showing it off, send me a link to your stuff. I'd love to see it. Anyway, at this time every week for 2 hours, I come to Twitch TV to work on the Project Spaghetti, a top-down 2D cowboy shooter where the bullets fired bounce around the screen with a pinball mechanic. Last week, I went through that to-do list I made and put up on Trello.com, again, to calculate roughly how many estimated theoretical hours worth of tasks I've been getting done every week, in order to update how many tasks I attempt to take on every episode, as well as to give me a base for figuring out how much I can get done by the end of the year deadline which I set. And after that, I added in some code to speed up the bullets after a certain number of bounces, making it much more dangerous for the player who just fires bullets off, but compensating the risk with a little bit of a reward by giving more points if the bullets hit an enemy when they've sped up. That enemy that I put in there is a rough enemy, but it's a red Tengu instead of a blue Tengu. And he's got a villainous black hat, so you know he's a bad guy. So, next, it'll be time to make those enemies more than just bullet fodder for the player. I have a choice of whether to get them moving or shooting first. I decided to go with shooting because the faster I can make things more dangerous for the player, the faster it starts to feel like a game. And also, there's an important gameplay decision that needs to be made involved with that. What does it mean for an enemy to start shooting in Project Spaghetti? Do the enemies get just one shot? Do their bullets fly around the screen until they hit something just like the player's bullets? Or do the enemy bullets behave differently? That's a lot to decide, and the decisions that get made are going to have a big impact on gameplay and how difficult the game is. My gut feeling is that I don't want to limit the enemies to just one bullet, because then they're not very threatening. Their bullet is, of course, but the enemy themselves aren't, and that's no fun. I want the player to want to kill enemies as fast as possible, basically, and I want to make it so that, the longer they leave enemies alive, the more dangerous it is for them, but at the same time, if they can get their bullet fast enough before it hits an enemy, get more points for it. But, if I have multiple enemies constantly firing bullets, then the number of those pinball bullets whizzing around the screen is going to quickly outgrow the number of things to hit and make it almost impossible to dodge them all. One possible solution is to have the enemy's bullets not bounce, That's not a bad idea, but it kind of goes against what I'm doing with the game, which is to make a shooter with the pinball mechanic. And as I posted on the site, the gameplay focus is important to maintain. So I want enemies to be able to fire multiple bullets, and I want those bullets to bounce around. But I don't want hundreds of bullets on the screen. So that leaves me, I think, with two options. Either allow something other than players and enemies to absorb bullets, or give the bullets an expiration. When starting out, I mentioned that I wanted the player to have a limited number of bullets, at the moment 6, because 6 shooter, to force them out of hiding to run and pick up bullets off of dead enemies, when they run out. So if I make bullets go away, I could create a situation where the player's out of luck, but I do want to limit the number of bullets. So what I think I'll try is to have the bullets disappear after they've been in play too long, but to appear as a pickup when the number of bullets drops to 0, giving the player a second chance. But first, I'll head over to Trello, the place where I keep my task list, and check this week's to-do list and update it if necessary. So let me jump over there, bring my desktop up, and jump over to Trello. So, looking at last week, episode 5 here, I got quite a few things done, but, little tasks. I sped the bullet up, I got the bad Tengu cowboy game, or the bad Tengu character into the game. I got, when that character gets hit by a bullet, in other words, there's a collision, that cowboy dies. I've updated the score, and I've inserted a high score variable, but obviously it doesn't carry over from game to game because I have to create something else behind it first. By the way, this Trello.com site is public, so if you come over to the link, I'll put it in the YouTube annotations as well, and it's over at the site. But you can always check this task list whenever you want if you're curious about how the game's going. This is episode 6, and here, as you can see in the task list, I've got fix the collision. What this is around the edges of the screen I have a very thin collision border, but the problem is when the bullets go too fast, there's a chance that they can skip over that collision. So I do need to fatten that out a little bit first as a a fix thing. The next thing is, let me explain why I should fix that first. The reason I should fix that first is if I'm going to start making bullets disappear or put conditions on them, I'm going to want to make sure that I know exactly how many bullets I have in play. And the next thing, it'll be just drawing a rough bullet pickup, power up or whatever that gets left behind, either when the bad guy dies or when the screen runs out of bullets. I'm also going to want to get that bad cowboy shooting. They won't move, but they'll shoot at the player. And I'm also going to, if I can get to it, that might not get to it, but if I can get to it, I want to implement that dodge function for the player, because if there's going to be a lot of bullets flying around, it's about time they get a dodge move. So let's go to Game Maker. Game Maker Studio is what I'm using to make the game, by the way. It's pretty reasonable. And let me show what I did last week first. Show where we are. So as you can see, we've got a couple of bad guys just standing around, basically. I just dropped them in there. And I've got barrels that can bounce bullets and walls that can bounce bullets. I can move my player around in every direction. And there's no animation. All these graphics are incredibly rough, obviously. That's on purpose, so I don't waste time fancying up graphics before I have the gameplay decided. And I can press Control to fire a bullet. If I just hit the enemy right off the bat, it's just worth 100 points. But if I can get that bullet bouncing around, after a couple of bounces, it speeds up, and the color changes, obviously, like for blue to yellow, and as you can see, it speeds up, and it's worth a lot more. So like right there, that yellow bullet when you hit the Tengu is worth 300 points. And there's no win condition or anything like that in the game yet. But first, let's fix that collision. All those collisions are over here in the sprites, and I think I have it in border. So yeah, as you can see, the black in here I think is the collision. Yeah, it's just basically everywhere there's a pixel, there's collision, and those borders are awfully thin. So I want to edit that sprite and fatten up those walls a little bit. I guess I have to change both of those to black. Okay. I don't want to get the border too fat because then the player is going to see open space, but for some reason they can't go into it. So that'd be a little bit weird. A little bit more. Let's try to make it the same. That's a little too much. Okay, well, at least that should fatten it up. Not sure if I have to uncheck and recheck those or not. Probably not. So just to make sure that's working. Yep. So you can see there's a little bit of an edge of the screen where the player can't go. I think this is probably a forgivable amount. It's I'd prefer it a little closer to the edge maybe, but I think this is probably what I need to make sure that those bullets never. Yeah, that's kind of weird. Actually, what I should do, if GameMaker calculates collision even if things are off the screen, what I could do is probably increase the size of that border so that it's actually bigger than the current resolution, which is 640 by 480, and then just move that collision outside. That might be what I need to do. So let's give that a shot. Transform. Resize canvas. Let's see. Let's go with 110%. Well, that's a little too much. 105% then. Probably what I should do is actually use a different color so that I know what I need to erase. And I can leave the building one alone because the buildings are actually fine as they are. It's a nice thick collision as it is. So let's see. Let's get rid of this. And I have no idea if this will actually work properly or not, but I just want to give it a shot. I have to actually be pretty careful about this because if I do leave a jagged edge or something, the bullet or something might actually bug out on it. Wow, this is... I probably should have just gone out to Photoshop. This is not an easy thing to do in this editing screen. Yeah, okay, there we go. And I'll just also fill out the top. I can change the color back because I'm finished deleting stuff. And I'm noticing a little bit of a jagged edge over here, so I do want to fix that. Actually, not make it worse if I can help it. It's really important. I mean, it's kind of a not a very fun task, but it's always important in games, especially if it's a 3D game or something, to pay very, very, very close attention to collision because that's where a lot of bugs come from. You know, sloppy collision can really create a big hassle for you because, you know, it leaves just a tiny little chink in your game's armor that, you know, unless you hit that spot with the right conditions, you'll never see the bug. But when you put the game in the hands of thousands of people, they will find that bug. Okay, let's see what happens with this. Collision's still behaving normally there. It's still awfully fat for some reason. On the sides, on the bottom it's alright. Well, it's a little too wide on the bottom. So I need to shave it off the side, add to the bottom. I think I know what's going on. It's not the picture that's the problem, it's the way it's being dropped into this room. That's why. And I need to turn snapping off if I can remember how to do that. Just one. Okay. Huh. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see whether it calculates the left edge of the screen properly or not. Still a little too low. Right edge, you can go right up to the edge. Left edge, a little bit, so I do need to change that up a bit. So let's just add a little bit of extra padding into here, and a little bit of extra padding into here. Can't tell if that's dirt on my monitor or if it's okay. I love hunting for pixels. Okay, let's see what this is now. Yep. 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 And the right side is fine too. Let's just make sure the bullets don't go off the screen. Looks like they're behaving properly. Even the fast bullets aren't, you know, skipping past the collision or anything, so I think we've got it. It's something I should be careful to be on the lookout for. It's kind of hard to tell when a bullet disappears in this game because obviously it can hit the player, it can hit the enemy. But, you know, if I notice a bullet just kind of disappear even though nothing happened to it, that's something I need to look into. So, alright, the collision fixed. Done. The next thing will be, you know, just to create a rough bullet pickup. And I do want to do that in Photoshop. Let's see. Let's start with the bullet icon as a base. I don't want to just have, a bullet because that's going to be kind of hard to see in the game itself. And I probably want to change the color up so it doesn't look like a bullet too. Like in old 8-bit games, what they'd often do is, just have a single color something or other in a circle. The reason they did that was so that you didn't mistake it for a game object, and you could tell, right off the bat that it's a power-up. So more than actually drawing a bullet, I want to make this more of kind of an icon of sorts. Unfortunately, I'm using the name bullet icon, but bullet drop. We'll call it bullet drop. And let's see, 16 by 20. This is zoomed in at 100%. Yeah, that's not too bad. Let me just check how big that is in the screen. So I want to make sure it's visible. And if I'm going to put a circle around it, I want to make sure it has room. Actually, yeah, that's not a bad size because where I'm using this bullet icon is up here for the number of bullets the player has. If one of those is lying on the ground, that's more than enough. So we'll keep the image size, but I will change what this looks like. A little bit of zoom. And since I'm trying to make this game at least, have that retro look, trying to keep it pixel perfect. Not drinking water as fast as I should, probably because it's not as hot as it usually is. The reason for that is there's a giant typhoon about to roll into Japan. Good for beating the heat, not so good for being in the middle of a typhoon. Thankfully it hasn't come yet, otherwise I'd probably have to keep shoving the trees away from my windows as things blow against them. So let's try scaling that down to use it as a base for the icon. So 50%. I'll just paint over the icons again. Well, see what Photoshop is doing is it's trying to be helpful by doing aliasing on the edging when I shrink it down to make it look like it should when it's shrunk down. The problem is if you're doing pixel art, you don't want that effect because it screws with the pixels. It gets rid of the pixely look, basically. It smooths it out for you. Let's see. Well, I'll go ahead and redo that. Let's go with my original plan. Image size. Free transform. There's got to be a way to do this, the same way with image size where it just uses nearest neighbor. But I don't know what that is, so I'll just do this by hand. Get my brush. Okay, 1 pixel. And I'll just repaint those. Get rid of that aliasing. And I don't need these colors anyway. I do want to change the color up, and whenever I do colors in Project Spaghetti, I always want to use the original Commodore 64 palette. That's part of the retro look I'm going for, is to use the Commodore 64 color palette. And I want this thing to be quite visible. Let's see, if I'm going to have a town... Actually, I shouldn't worry about the other maps too much. Town, graveyard, nighttime, desert. So obviously yellow is going to be used quite a bit. Brown is probably going to be used. So let's see what's going to be something that stands out. Obviously pink would stand out, but it's not going to be very clear that that's a bullet. So maybe I'll go with this purple color. I should have just used the fill tool, but it's not that many pixels, so I'll just do it that way. And then I want to create a circle, if possible. So it kind of looks like that. Oh, that's brilliant, if that stays there for me. let's see, I'll just paint around the edges of that. Oh, whoops. Guess I can't go outside of that circle when it's selected. Why is it doing this weird half fill thing? Is it because it's trying to do something with the circle? Yeah, that's really weird. I don't understand why it's doing that. Oh yeah, it is trying to help. Once again, it's trying to be helpful, and it's not succeeding. So I'll just try to remember what that looked like. And I want to balance it, so start with 4 there. Yeah, alright, well I'll just do this by sight and try to fix it if it doesn't look like a circle later. Let's add 1 more to the edges. And this may not look like a proper circle, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, that's fine then. Let's see what this looks like zoomed out. So that's what it'll look like when it shows up in the game. I probably need to thicken up that border a little bit because I did double the resolution, so. Okay. And I do need to stretch that out just a little bit. Actually, no. No, I think I want to keep it to that. Let's see what this looks like. It's not too bad. I mean, the border on the left, it's a little too much, but let's see if I can bring that in. Because it is taller than it is wide, so. And then maybe I'll shave a few pixels off of here. Okay, that should do for now. Obviously this is rough just like everything else, but I do want it to be visible in the game, which is why I took a little time with it. Okay, so that's bullet drop. I don't have anything behind it so that's transparent. Okay, so let's see, I have to put that pickup in the game next. So I need to add the sprite first. In Game Maker, you always have to add a sprite. Let's see, it's called Bullet Drop, and I will call that SPR sprite Bullet Drop. And I don't want precise collision checking because it's not worth doing it. I would probably just rather go with the full image. The reason being, if the player is close enough to the power-up, I want them to be able to pick it up without having to worry about the edges too much. Or I could just go with an ellipse. So at least, you know, if the player looks like they're touching it, they'll pick it up. And the reason I don't want to use precise collision checking on everything, for this game, it's a 2D art game that doesn't have that much going on the screen at once, so you know, collision calculation is probably not going to toast anyone's computer, but you know, it's just good practice to not, you know, use collision when you don't have to, because you know, all of those things, when a pixel overlaps a pixel and whether there's transparent pixels and all that, it's another calculation for the computer to do. So the simpler you can keep the collision, the better. I think, For this, I think all it does is check if sprites are overlapping, so it probably doesn't change the calculation that much. But if you're doing like a 3D game in Unity or something, say you have, Nathan Drake from Uncharted or something, if you put collision on each and every one of his little hairs and, fingers and everything else, one, it's going to create some weirdness, and two, that's a lot to calculate for, physics and everything else. So usually what you do, like for example in Unity, just to kind of diverge, is often for players you'll end up using like a capsule, a little sphere that just kind of contains all of them, so that the calculations are really simple, especially the player, because the player's moving around and doing a lot of stuff. If it's a more complicated character, maybe they're going to break it down, but every time you break down collision, the problem is, again, those bugs often come from collision. If you have, like, say for example, you have different cylinders for every arm or whatever, then if they bend their arm, those two collision points might create a problem. If they're not interacting with each other, maybe you can get past that. But if something else just happens to be here when they bring that collision together, or like for their legs or anything else, like if those collisions kind of sandwich something, it could shoot whatever is coming into the arm way off into space or whatever. In games, you see it a lot, especially in like third-person games. You'll see once in a while, I'm sure if you've played a lot of games, you see it where your player just suddenly gets shot into space. The reason that happens is because of a collision problem. It's trying to calculate it, but it can't figure out how. So the calculation goes crazy, and off they go like Kerbal Space Program, out into the outer limits. And getting back to the game, sorry for that divergence. In case you're making collision for a game, thought it might be useful to know. I want to create the pickup object, so let's call this just bullet drop. And I don't think I need to do anything when I create it, but I do need a collision event, and the only person that can pick up bullets... Actually, it would be interesting if enemies could pick up bullets. I'll think about that now. Let me drop that into my notes, because that might actually be pretty interesting. Because think about it, if an enemy runs out of bullets and they start to run for the same pickups that you're running for, it might create a little interesting interaction there. Might be worth doing, but it's not a high priority thing, so I'll just leave it as a note for now. For now, the only thing I want is, if this thing collides with the player, I want it to disappear. From its perspective, that's all it needs to do, is just disappear. From the player's perspective, let's see, from the player's perspective, what I want to have happen is the number of bullets needs to go up. And the number of bullets is kept track of in PL bullets, conveniently enough. So if there is a collision event with this, I want to add a bullet to the player's inventory. But if they already have 6 bullets, I don't want them to have more than 6 bullets. So I am going to want to create a condition on that. Let's just go with that. So if they have less than 6 bullets, then do this. And just to test to make sure that it works, actually I do need to add the sprite in. Just to make sure that this works, I'm going to put one of those bullet pickups in here. Hopefully it shows up. Really? Undo only undoes one action? Wow. Okay, that needs, if Game Maker's coming out with the next version, that does need to be addressed. because that's rather inconvenient. Let's see. I've had problems with this before. How did I fix it? I guess because I can't drop on top of that. Okay, well, let's see what happens. Hopefully I didn't mess around with my collision too much. So yeah, there it is sitting on the ground. You know, later on I probably want some kind of effect on it so it looks like it's pulsing, or, you know, something to attract a little bit of attention, because as it is right now, it just kind of looks like a glitch. So, fire off a bullet. I have less than 6 bullets. So, pick it up. Yep, got another one. So probably what I want to have happen is if a bullet hits an enemy, or, let's see, what else do I want to have happen? If the enemy is able to fire bullets, and the player's out of bullets, and if my ultimate goal is to have super fast bullets disappear, then let's fix the bullet thing first. All the bullet stuff where it's speeding it up is in the script here. I want to create another bounce floor. This bounce floor controls, you know, how many bounces it needs to do before it speeds up. So I want to create PL bounce floor max. And let's go ahead and make that 30. PL bounce floor max. And now I'm going to use that I need to change this to an else, and I'm going to add a new condition if it lets me. If it goes over 30 bounces, then I want to get rid of the bullet. So I need to look up how to do that in script. GameMaker destroy object code. Not COD. I don't want to destroy COD. COD's delicious. How to destroy an object. Hopefully it just doesn't describe the instance destroy. Thank you, GMC member. And just for my information, with object, okay, well that's good to know for the future, but I don't think I'll be using that anytime soon. So I need to use instance destroy. And let's see, being destroyed is fine, but when it's destroyed, I probably want to have a power-up up here, if it's the player's bullet. What's a good way to do that? Should I use a global variable to keep track of how many bullets are in play? Yeah, that's probably the way to go. Let me just check out my globals here. Oh, I don't have anything in there. Let's see, globals. Okay, so global bullets in play is 0. Let me keep track of that. So now, in the bullets creation event, I want to change that. So every time a bullet's created, I want it to implement that. when the bullet disappears, I want it to decrement that. Same for this. And finally, in here, probably need to do it before I do the destroy, because the destroy might just suddenly stop the script from running. Not sure whether that's how scripting works or not in GameMaker, but normally that's how scripting works. If you destroy the object that's calling the script, that's it. That would be expected. So just to be safe, I'll put that before destroying the bullet. So now, if the bullet is fired, the number of bullets in play goes up 1. If it hits the player or a bad cowboy, it goes down. Bullet drop. Let's see, system. I think system is still attached to the room. One thing I'm going to want the system function to check is every step check whether or not this, let's see, what do I want to do? Actually, I want to check the player's bullets first. So PL bullets is 6. Do I want to do this inside of player? Doesn't really fit with player in terms of logic, you know. Pickups don't really have anything to do with the player, to be honest. So bullet drop system. Okay, now let's do this. Applies to object player PL bullets is less than 6. So if the player has less than 6 bullets, I think I'm going to run into something here. Let's see, global bullets in play. If global's bullets in play, so if the player has less than 6 bullets, this is actually kind of an interesting problem. It actually requires a lot more thought than I thought it would. Things like this happen. When do I want those pickups to show up? I guess I could just keep it simple, actually. It's actually simpler than I'm thinking about it. And I probably don't even need that bullets in play thing. So let's get rid of that. It's actually kind of a weird thing to have anyway, so I'll get rid of that. Almost accidentally renamed this thing. Let's see, let's get rid of that global variable that I just set up. I still want the bullets to disappear. But what I want to do is, let's see, I wonder how the alarm works. Do I want to do the alarm thing? No, step. Let's just do it easy. Step. So every step, come in here. Add, create events. System timer. Let's just call it timer. Start at 0. Every step, increment the timer. And Now I need to check if, I'm sure GameMaker does, what the modulus division thing is for GameMaker. As it describes here, you know, what modulus division is, or modulo division is it gives you the remainder after a division, because like if you're dividing two integers, you know, if you're dividing 65 by 30, 30 goes into 65 two times, but then you've got a little bit of a remainder there. And what mod gives you back is that remainder. And in games, this is often used with timing things. So time mod 60. Timer mod. And then, you know, how many seconds? I think it's, right now it's going at about 60 frames per second. But that's actually something I need to be careful about, because if the frame rate changes, then it can screw up the way the game works. Oh, delicious looking pasta. GameMaker frame rates. Variable. Room speed. Let me just make sure that room speed is actually a GameMaker variable. I went from advanced to novice. Okay. Steps per second of the current room. Target steps per second. It is not the actual steps per second, which is what the advanced form was warning about. To find out how many steps are actually executed, use FPS. Do I want to go with target? I think because it's game logic, I just want to go with target. To explain the difference between these two, what it's saying is, you know, there's a certain number of frames per second, so like it's usually like 30 or 60, for example. So 30 of these logic steps happen every second. What room speed gives you is what it theoretically should be, and what FPS gives you is what it actually is after, you know, if the user's you know, running other programs in the background and it doesn't have enough to calculate the game, then it starts to drop frames and things like that. Or it starts to slow down, you know, in games when you have too many enemies on the screen, things start to slow down. That's what causes that. Just not enough processing to catch up, because you're trying to do too much in those steps. So FPS would give us the actual result, room speed would give us the target. Since in this case, I'm using it to create power-ups that appear, I want to use the target because it doesn't have to be precise, per se. It's just kind of a, you know, a theoretical thing. So let's see, if the room speed is, for example, 30 frames per second, and my timer hits, let me put some parentheses around that. If my timer hits 30 and the room speed is 30, then that'll give me 1. In other words, 1 second. How many seconds do I want to pass? Let's see. That's a power up every second, actually. Actually, that's a problem with using the modulo division, is that I can only go up to a second. Let me think about this one while I take a break. I will be right back. Gotta make sure I drink my water, because otherwise my throat is drying out, as you can tell. But I will be right back. Thank you for waiting while I took that break. Obviously, I figured out the problem because it's an easy one to solve, and because I couldn't solve it right away, indicates I'm not a math major, obviously. But, you know, simple problem. Obviously, if I want the remainder of a division and I want it to be 0, room speed, for example, if it's 30, if I wait for a 0 after every 30, that means I get it every second. So all I need to do is multiply that room speed. Duh, right? Okay. So this is one of those things that I do want to have a global for. Pickup interval. So I'll make this global pickup interval the number of seconds between bullets, and actually I don't want greater than 0, I just want 0. Otherwise bullets are going to be appearing all over the screen. So, okay, I've got the game's timer. I've got... Actually, that's another good point. Using the room speed was the right way to go, because the timer I'm using is not an actual timer, it's just a timer variable that's being set every step. So using the theoretical frames per second is actually the right fit for that. Let's see, global pickup interval, and I just need to add that. So every time that happens, I want to create a new bullet pickup. But first, let me add that global in here. Global pickup interval, I believe I called it. And let's just go ahead and make that 5 seconds. I think my stream might have just cut out on me. It appears I'm back, though. Sorry if it did. Let's see. So, every time that happens, every time it reaches that interval, I want to create a new pickup. Create instance. Bullet drop. And I want this X and Y to be somewhat random. I don't want it to be perfectly random, because then the pickup will start appearing on barrels and enemies and everything else. So let's go with, let's see what my room looks like first here. Middle, upper left, lower right, or upper right. To force the player to kind of go around the screen. Seems like it might be a good starting point anyway. So that is 5, 150, 160. Let's go with 20, 160 for now. And I'm going to want to create some ifs on this. And I do need a random variable now. So back to Google we go. Game maker random. Choose. Wrong section. Okay, well I'll go with Venomous's advice here. And just so I can adjust the range later, I'll go ahead and use the range one. And I think there's, let's see, iRandom. I suspect that's integer random, but I want to check. Whether it returns integers or whether it returns, like, 1.3, 1.4, etc. Okay, so it only returns integers, which is fine. That's all I need. And because there's this question about iRandom returning the same number every time, I should probably look at this as well. Because usually, in C++ and everything else, programming languages usually have to start the randomizer. Otherwise, it just feeds you back whatever value's in it. So I will make sure to do that randomize thing first before anything else. I will go ahead and throw it in there, even though it's not quite the right spot. Let's see. So I got the randomizer set. Now I need something in here. Randomize. Oops, that's not what I wanted. I want to go back. And go iRandom range. This is just for random, so just iRandom range and then the range. Okay. So iRandom range 1, 2, let's see, how many places did I have? I had the bullet could appear in any of the four corners or the middle, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I don't want this in the if statement because then I'm going to create a problem. I want to assign it to a variable. Call it sys pickup location. I'll just make the default 1 just in case. Actually, no, this is where I use iRandom. iRandom range 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now sys pickup location has a number between 1 and 5. My test is if it's 1, do this. Else if it's 2, do this. Again. Else if it's 3, do this. And I'm missing some of these bars for the else's, so let's put that in. Else there. Else at the end. Else there. This, I hate the way this looks because it's, I just wish there was a switch statement, to be honest, in this GUI interface, because I hate these nested if-else statements to do this. But it's probably not worth doing a script for it. If it's 3, then that, then I need an else here. And I need another if it's 4. Then it goes in there. Then else again. If it's 5, then go into there. Ah, that looks so ugly. Yeah, I think I'll go with the script. Yeah, I want to use the GameMaker GUI as much as possible, but for these if-else statements, that I don't want to create a big debugging problem for me later by trying to stick with this system. So I'm just going to use the scripting language. So if sys pickup location is 1, then I have to check and see how we did these if-else's somewhere else. Let's get rid of all of these. Where did I have my other if-else? Player? No, bullet. Bullet is where I had that if-else stuff. Okay, there's no then. I don't need to have a then, but I do need an else if, and there needs to be a space in there. So I don't need then, and I do need an else if. Sys pickup location equals 2. Three, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3. So as you can see, this looks a lot better than what I was doing in that GUI thing, because I get to pick where things are indented. If they had a switch thing in the GUI, then it'd probably look fine, but because you have to use if else, if else, if else, it starts to really drag in there. So let's see. If that's then, let's see, pickup location 1. I need to create the object at that place that I picked. So once again, jumping off to Google for an answer. Google, friend of the developer. Object create code. Alright, there we go. Instance creation. Yeah, that doesn't seem exactly what I want. Object creation code. Let's try another place. That's the exact same tutorial. Let's try random objects. I'm sure it'll give us a hint anyway. Instance create, there we go. Okay. Nice to see some snark on the message boards. Welcome to the internet. Learn to program. As a response to whoever posted that question. Not sure why people on the internet can't be more friendly, but alright. Some people have issues. But as long as they're helpful, I suppose they're allowed to have issues. Alright. X 15, and then what was my Y? 160. I wanted 20 and 160. 25, 20 and 160. And create a, okay, so create a bullet drop in the upper left corner if sys pickup location is 1. And I'm going to need to find those other locations. Around here is about, let's see, 620. Let's go with 620 and 460 for either one. 620, 460, 620, 460. That actually sounds about right too. 620, 460, 620, because that's 20 pixels away from the edge of the screen, so just calculating it out, that sounds right. And then I want one for the middle, which is, let's see, 640. Well, alright, I don't need to look at that actually. I should just calculate it to be precise. So if I've got 640 by 480, I just need to divide that by 2. So 640 divided by 2 is 320, 480 divided by 2 is 240. So that should create a bullet drop in the middle of the screen. Else if. Okay. I guess those else ifs do chain properly. So it does kind of work like a switch statement, which is good. So it should randomly pick a location. Oh, I do need to do that irandom range thing again. And do I need to declare integers in GameMaker? Okay, you don't even need to say anything. Alright, well, fine. Good enough. So, I just have to say something called sys pickup location equal to this in GameMaker. It'll figure it out for me. So it's almost kind of like something like VBA in that regard. Usually C++, other programming languages, they want you to say explicitly what the variable is, whether it's an integer or a string or whatever, because they're trying to be helpful basically, because they're trying to force you to think about those things and know what those variables are before you use them, because otherwise it gets a little unpredictable when you're using, basic or well, yeah, basically basic, Visual Basic, whether it's Visual Basic or VBA or whatever. If you're using a scripting language where you don't have to say integer, string, etc. in advance, it can create bugs later, things that are kind of hard to figure out, though it is more convenient that way. But irandom returns an integer, so it's going to make this an integer to compensate for that. So hopefully this works. And I do need to put this inside of an if. I shouldn't have gotten rid of that if, actually. Timer, mod, what did I call it? Globals? Room speed, sorry. Room speed times global pickup interval. I guess the coffee's finally kicking in because my memory is keeping up with me. So if it's time to create one of these, and execute this code. Now, one problem I'm going to run into really quick is that it's going to create one of those pickups right off the bat, but hopefully because the player has 6 bullets, it shouldn't create a pickup. Hopefully. We'll find out. It might actually, because I might have deleted that logic somewhere. Okay, it does create a pickup right off the bat. And, oh yeah, I still left that bounce floor max thing in there. I need to get rid of that. Bounce floor max, get rid of that. Oh no. No, 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 that was fine. BL bounce floor max. That was actually fine, what I had. BL bounce floor max. Maybe I just misspelled it. Did I misspell it in here? BL bounce floor max. Looks alright. Let's try that again. But first thing I want to do is to make sure that this pickup doesn't get created if the player has bullets. So I've got my if here. I could add an and in there, but I don't mind one nested if, so I'm just gonna put it in here. So if PL bullets is less than 6, then we worry about creating that pickup. So if that works, it still appears right off the bat, so it's not figuring it out right. Okay, let's see what this is. PL bullets, action if PL bullets is less than 6. Okay, well it's saying get variable is not finding it, so I probably just misnamed it. PL bullets is 6. Alright, it is called PL bullets. Maybe the pro player hasn't been created yet, and that's the problem? Oh, whoops, I said other as opposed to player. Well, that would explain it. I still don't like how it's creating one of those bullet things right off the bat, though. Where do I want to put my calculation? I guess in here. Alright, well, let's add a little extra math in. Because what it's doing right now is it's creating it every time that timer divided by this has no remainder. The problem with that is 0 divided by, anything is 0, so, the very first frame it automatically creates this pickup. It shouldn't actually create it because the player has 6 bullets, but yeah, let me check that logic first. That might actually have just fixed it, so let's not go fiddling with this yet. No, no, no. For some reason it still does that. And it's creating it in a weird, weird place. Oh, okay. Never mind. Alright, I know what the problem is. I just have that object sitting there. So I need to get rid of that, if it'll let me. Okay, I just have that one that I created right off the bat. So I've got my global pickup interval at 5 seconds. Variable timer set to 0 on creation. Timer is equal to timer plus 1 every step. And so that's 30 times 5, for example. That should be working fine. That should be working fine. Okay. Hopefully this is working now. So when I have less than 6 bullets, those pickups should start appearing. There we go. One appeared in the bottom right corner, bottom left corner. Whoop. And 5 seconds seems to be a little too fast, because they're appearing, one right after the other. Also, that middle one is appearing a little too high, so I want to fix that as well. So I'm just going to fix those two variables really quick. 5 is way too fast, so let's go with 20 seconds for that. And also, let's see, this is about 145, it's about 145 tall, So 640, 480, 480 minus, let's just say 140, would be 340 divided by 2 would be 170. Hopefully I got that math right, or I'm going to be very embarrassed later when I watch this video. Let's see, 170. So that last one, that's putting it in the middle. Let's make that 170. Okay, well, that fixes my bullet pickup problem. So every 20 seconds now, if the player has less than 6 bullets, one of those power-ups is going to appear in the corner of the screen. Let's see. Going back to the project thing, leaving a bullet behind obviously took a lot longer than I expected to, because figuring out where to put that bullet on the screen, actually, I haven't even done that yet. So I've randomly added bullets to the screen, but I haven't actually had it where the enemy leaves a bullet pickup behind when I shoot them. So that's something I need to do, but that should actually be quick. So when the bullet collides with the bad cowboy disappears. But I also want to create a new bullet pickup in that place. And I can use the same script because it was just a script. And actually, I don't even need to use a script. I could just, let's see, where is it? Create an instance of the object. And the object that I want to create is a bullet pickup, and I want to create it where the enemy died. So let's just check that. It's probably just X and Y, to be honest. Okay, instance XY. So this will create one of those bullet pickups right where the enemy died, theoretically. And with that in mind, you know, this random one might only come into play later after enemies start shooting around the screen and I start getting rid of bullets. Well, let's see what happens. Let's make sure enemies do leave a bullet pickup behind when I shoot them. Instance. Okay, obviously that instance thing was not correct. Yep, go away. Instance X. Object X. Alright, that's what it was. I do actually remember that one. So let's go back to here. Object X, object Y. I should actually read those posts all the way to the end before I actually start coding, because obviously it's the internet. Not everyone has the right answer. Apparently that person doesn't either. Okay, action create object, bullet drop, object XY. It's not getting the object. Let's go here, because I was doing the same thing with the bullet when I was creating it. Player.x, object.x. I wonder if I can just get away with using x. Bullet drop, bad cowboy. It's all in here. It actually might just be because I have this after it's getting destroyed. Let's see if that step changes things. Nope, okay, that doesn't change things. So I will go ahead and fix that then. Jaborian joined us for the chat. Hello, Jim. Thanks for stopping by. Right now, I'm not sure how long you've been here, but basically what I'm trying to do is create bullet drops so that when you shoot an enemy, they leave a bullet behind, which forces you to go and fetch it to reload, basically. And right now, the issue that I'm having is that I want the bullet drop to appear where the enemy died, but it's not getting that information properly. And I don't think this one will work, so I will have to check it up, but just to make sure. Oh, okay, well, never mind. That one did work. So, let's see. Jumping over to Bad Cowboy. Bullets. Okay, so creating an instance of the bullet where the enemy died. You don't have to use object dot, instance dot, any of that stuff. Just X and Y stores the X and Y coordinate of whatever object is using those variables. So, because the X and Y is the upper left corner of the sprite, those power-ups are not going to appear where the enemy died per se. It's going to appear kind of in the upper left of where the enemy died. I want to change that. I think the enemy size right now, let's go and check that. 48 by 42. So basically I want it to appear in the middle, so 24 by 21. So I just need to add that into there, and those bullets should appear where the enemy died. Yeah, it's a little to the lower right, but I can fix that just by eyesight. So let's just drop this to 15, 10. See about where that gets us. Part of it is because the bullet pickup it's got a little bit of a border around it, and the enemy sprites also have a little bit of a border around it, so it's not precise, but that looks pretty good. So now wherever those enemies die, I can pick up more bullets where they left them behind. And I've also got it where bullet pickups do randomly appear at the edges of the screen or in the middle. Jim Orion says, don't you have to minus out the value of the bullet sprite center? Yeah, exactly. Exactly what I needed to do. Yep, and let's go ahead and give ourselves a game over. So I did actually get that task done now. So episode 6, Bad Cowboy action, leave a bullet behind when they die. That is done. Now, in the 30 minutes that remain, I'm obviously not going to get to getting the cowboy shooting and the player dodging. So I will go ahead and move that out to next time and do the Bad Cowboy action shooting. So actually have the cowboy shooting at the player. This is actually a huge task, but we'll see if I can get it done. So let's see, when the player fires, it creates an instance of object bullet at position 0, 0. Now let's see, if I do that bullet, the problem with the bullet now is that everything I think is tied into the player. Maybe. Yeah, so I've got bullet and it's tied into the player. That's an interesting problem. Do I create another bullet object for enemies, or do I fix all this so that it can take any parameter? That is an interesting question. I don't think that I'll be able to pass in, for example, when this bullet is created, I don't think it will know who created it, which is a problem. But let's check that out, because GameMaker might actually have something to do that. Let's see, object, instance, creation, GameMaker. How would I even describe that in a search? Originating objects? Yeah, I don't think that information is going to be passed on. Like, once that bullet's created, I don't think it knows if a player created it or if an enemy created it. Which is actually, good in terms of coding and everything else because it's safer that way. But, the easy solution would be to just create something called enemy bullet and do the exact same thing I'm doing for player, except to do it for enemies. The only problem with that is now if every time I want to change like a bullet, I'm going to have to change it in two places. So if I don't change the enemy one, but I do change the player one, it's going to create different behavior depending on the bullet, and that's not going to make any sense. So I do need to find a way to have just one bullet object that works for both enemies and players. And since I can't reference basically the parent object that created this thing, what I'm going to have to do is move all of this stuff into the parent object. And that is actually going to be quite tricky. That is actually going to be an hour-long task, so I will actually switch this. In fact, I'm going to up the estimate on this to 2 hours, because pulling all of that logic out, getting it working for bad cowboys and player cowboys is going to take a lot longer than an hour. That might actually take the next episode. So, I'll go back to player action dodge, because he still needs to dodge his bullets, and I think I can get that done by the time this episode ends, because it shouldn't be that complicated. Especially since I don't have any visuals for it. I may actually create a rough one just to do it. So let's see, keyboard event. So right now I'm using the control key to fire, the directional keys to move the cowboy around. So for a dodge, let's see, what's a good dodge key? The player is going to want to dodge in a hurry, so it needs to be a nice big key on the keyboard. I think I'll go with space for now. So if the player hits space, that means dodge. And let's see here. So what needs to happen when the player hits space? So if I've got a bullet coming for him, and he hits space at just the right time, he should be able to dodge out of the way of that bullet, as opposed to just moving out of the way of it. So there's going to be timing involved. So that space, by hitting the space bar, it creates kind of a safe window of time for the player. But I don't want to have it where the player can just keep hitting space over and over again and be safe forever, so there has to be a little bit of a recharge on it. Probably also there needs to be a little bit of a delay before that safe window starts, so that, if the player hits space right off the bat, it doesn't dodge right off the bat. Well, actually, let's not do that, because this is kind of an old 2D shooting game, so actually being precise with the keys might actually be a good idea. So we'll just create a cooldown for it instead. So when the player hits space, I guess because I had nothing in there, it just tried to be helpful and deleted it for me, which was nice. So this is going to be another one of those timer things. Let's just call it PL dodge cooldown. dodge timer. As long as it's been a second since the last time they dodged. Again, room speed is the frame rate, so if it's 30, that means 30 frames per second. So if I just use room speed, that'll be 1 second. So if the player dodge, let's just call it cooldown so I know exactly what it is. If the player has dodged and more than a second has passed, then they can dodge again. Let's see, I also want to create this peel dodge cooldown. Because otherwise it's going to give me one of those errors that doesn't know what the variable is. And every step, I don't have a step 1 yet. Every step I'm going to want to increment that. So every frame, add 1 to it. So that's peel, dodge, cooldown, yep. And if it's been more than a second, then do what's in here. What I need to do in here is, before I forget, I obviously need to reset the dodge cooldown to 0. And I need to actually do dodging. Okay, so dodging, later on when I do create animation for the character, it is going to show them, ducking or whatever they do. So, whether I do that rough animation today or not is something for later, but the first thing I want to do is create a safe window where they're not going to get shot. I want the bullet to pass through them, so I probably want to do something in here that sets up a variable that will tell my bullet collision thing that I don't need to decrement lives to 0 or anything like that. Actually, there's a way I can do this without creating a whole bunch of extra variables, I think. Because right now, actually, because I haven't actually fixed anything, is if the PL dodge cooldown is greater than the frame rate, in other words, more than a second has passed, then reset it to 0. So all I have to do is actually use this PL dodge cooldown to determine whether or not it's safe or not. Which means, actually, that when I first create this variable, I don't want it to be 0, because if I leave it at 0, it means the player starts out, in the dodge state, which is no good. So let's do room speed. And also, let's see, globals, because that may be something I want to change later. Right now, 1 second. So this doesn't really have much meaning. But later on, maybe it's 2 seconds or half a second or whatever. That's something that's going to be I'm going to have to adjust when I do the gameplay stuff. But so what this is doing is room speed gives me how many frames per second, and then I'm multiplying that by my global cooldown seconds. That's fine. And let's go back to here. And I'm going to need to multiply that into this as well. So right now it's just 1 second. Let's see. PL dodge cooldown. If the player dodges, this goes to 0. And for this collision event, Now there's a decision here that needs to be made about how to go about this. Do I turn the player's collision off, for example, and allow the bullet to go through them? That's probably not a good idea because then they can start walking into barrels and walking off the screen, walking over enemies, everything else. But if I don't turn the collision off, then that bullet's probably going to hit the player and stop there, which is not what I want. That's probably not a good idea. So I probably want to figure out a way to get this bullet to pass through the player. There we go with another tricky issue. If I want the bullet to pass through the player, I don't want that collision event to do anything. Well, just to show, what's going on in my mind right now, what I'm trying to figure out, I'm going to show you what the problem is. Let's see, what was it? Rim speed times global dodge cooldown. I think it was. Let me just double check that. Yep, dodge cooldown. Okay, assuming I didn't do any introduce any bugs into the game. Yeah. Not working, obviously. So PL dodge cooldown. This only happens if it's less than room speed. Actually, whoops. What am I doing? That's what I want to do. So, no, there we go. That's the problem I was expecting. The problem I was expecting was, that block of code doesn't get executed as long as the player is safe. So obviously, as you can see, the number of lives in the corner there didn't drop down or anything, which is fine, but the bullet still disappears because it's colliding with the player. I can fix that in here, obviously. But, let's see. I think I'm going to be left with another problem even here. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be left with the same problem. Well, a different problem, actually. I think now it'll collide with the player, but it'll just stop. That actually works. Wow, okay, well, glad I tested that then. I was not expecting that to actually work. What I was expecting to happen was because the bullet has collision, the player has collision, and all I'm doing is, turning off the destroy the bullet and decrement lives thing with that spacebar thing. What I was expecting to happen is because they have collision, the bullet would not destroy itself per se, but because nothing happened, it would just hit the player and stop. But actually, now that I think about it, there's a reason that doesn't happen, and that's because the bullet has a speed, and because I'm not doing anything to stop the bullet. It's got a velocity, it's coming down, and I'm not doing anything to, bring the bullet back to before the collision. It's just going to keep going merrily on its way. Thankfully, that worked. Unfortunately, it is extremely difficult to tell when I'm actually safe. As you can see, yeah, I'm hitting the spacebar, but one, you can't see that, and two, I don't know exactly when I'm dodging. So the goal is going to be, when I'm safe, is to have the character look different, obviously, because it needs to compensate for that. And Jamorian had a comment, which is actually a really good solution, and it would have been a great solution if things didn't actually work out. He said you could create another layer so that the player is normally in layer 1 above the background, where he collides with objects in layer 1, and the bullet could be in a different layer, but hit him, but move to layer 2, where he still collides with the background, but bullets don't interact with that layer. And, he mentions obviously this is said with no knowledge of how I'm setting things up. But you can actually do that in GameMaker. There are layers. There's a depth field, and I think you'll be able to see it if I go into Room. Maybe. Objects, scale, rotation, flip. Let's see if it shows instance properties. Unfortunately, it doesn't show it in the Room view, but there is a way to set it up so that there's a depth. Mostly it's used for visuals, like for example if you've got a top-down 2D space shooting game, for example. You have like a ship that's going over and you've got maybe some things on the ground and you've got enemy ships, and you want to determine, as long as they don't bump into each other, you want to determine what shows up, closest to the camera, what basically goes up on top. So GameMaker, to help you do that, it does have like a variable that determines how far back a sprite is, and I'm pretty sure you could use that for collision events as well. Not entirely sure if it keeps track of that, that fake Z for collision events or not, but that would have been a potential solution if this didn't work. Thank you for that, because it's something that may come up later actually when running into enemies and other things. But for now, thankfully, it works, because the bullet has a velocity and the bullet will not be stopped by anything unless I explicitly say stop. So thankfully that worked out. I do want really quick, let's get rid of that. I do want really quick to create a version of the player that at least looks like he's dodging. At the end of the day, I'm going to want animation for this so that it shows the player ducking down, but let's see. I'll just call this dodge for now. Change that back. So now I need to get rid of some of these pixels to actually make it look like the player's ducking. How much can I do without making the player look weird? That's going to be a bit of a question. Slice the poor guy up. Oops, still got his shoes, unfortunately. Don't want to take his shoes away from him. Okay, well that's probably about as ducked as he's going to get. I could probably bring the hat down a little bit though. Let's merge those really quick. I could probably bring the hat down over his head, as the goal would be to get him to be about half size if possible. I can probably get rid of the neck as well, so that it actually does look like this bullet's not going to kill him when it whizzes over his head. And again, this is a rough sprite. There we go. That's probably about as crunched as I can get him, and still have people understand that he is the player. So let's export that as a new sprite, and let's just call it player dodge. Actually, I should probably keep track of where this is coming from. Yeah, it's fine. So I've got my original sprite there. I want a new sprite that I will call player dodge. And I'll load that thing that I had in. And, I could have actually, when changing the sprite over, just turned the collision checking off. Not a bad idea, actually, but, again, if an enemy just happens to walk over him while he's scrunched down, that might not be too good. Yeah, that's fine. I do kind of want it to match up to this collision here. And to do that, actually, first I need to double the size of this, because again, I changed the resolution to 640 by 480, so everything needs to be doubled in here. And let's see what I originally had. Whoops, I think I did the wrong one. Let's load that back in. Coffee's starting to fade on me, obviously. I don't want to resize the canvas, I wanted to do stretch. There we go. Okay, and I want the sides of that player to at least correspond to what it was originally, which was a rectangle, and I should probably write this stuff down. Rectangle, left 16, right 31, top 4, bottom 39. And I probably just want to keep these as are, because I don't want to create a situation where the players duck down and the collision changes, because then if an enemy just happens to walk where their head is and they pop out of that, problems are going to happen. So I want to keep the collision the same. So rectangle, manual, and I had 16, 31, 4, and 39. So that should be the exact same collision checking I have on the unducked version of the player. So that's sprite player dodge. Now, let's see. This is going to be a draw event, I would imagine. Draw self, draw sprite. Let's see. I have draw. And let's try draw begin. I think what this will do is when it starts to draw the player, it'll come into here automatically. It's kind of like step, but it happens when the draw event occurs. So again, if player dodge cooldown is this time less than, let's see, what was it? Rem speed times global dodge cooldown. In other words, if he's currently dodging, then do this. Else, do this. Now, let's see. If this, I wonder if this is going to swap out the sprite or not. Now, there's got to be a GUI command in here that actually swaps out sprites. Set font, set full screen. Wish the tooltips popped up a little faster. That's just text. Draw background. Draw sprite. Applies to self. Let's see what happens. Hopefully it doesn't draw just the duck sprite on top of him. I suspect that's what it will do. Here's the Z variable that I was talking about earlier. I think it's called subimage. That's kind of what they keep track of, how deep these sprites are. This should be interesting because I suspect what's going to happen is it's just going to keep drawing sprites on top of each other every time he ducks, which is not what I want, but I want to make sure that that is what the problem is before I start going about solving it. Let's see what happens. Okay, nothing. Which is kind of what I expected. Actually, since this isn't really anything to do with draw events, I'm just going to put this into step, or begin step. Let me just make sure that wasn't the problem. Maybe the draw event doesn't happen the way I think it's supposed to. Okay, yeah, that wasn't the problem. So this I will actually look up, because someone on Google is going to have the answer a lot faster than just debugging it. So switch sprites, GameMaker. Alright, change sprite. I must have looked that up before. Oh, I know why I looked it up before, because I was switching out the bullets. Okay. I've already done this before then. I just forgot. So, the bullets in here, when it speeds up, I'm changing the sprite index to a different sprite because the sprites are changing colors as they speed up, so I just need to do the exact same thing for the player, actually. Memory is going with the coffee fading. Let's see, step, begin step. And I don't want this. I just want a bit of script. Execute script. Execute code. Alright, execute code is fine. So the sprite index, if he's ducking, I want it to look like sprite, player dodge. And if he's not ducking, I want it to just be the normal sprite player. Let's see what that does first. May not have solved my problems. It did solve my problems. Okay, so now it kind of looks like the player's ducking. Obviously very, very rough. It needs to be animated, but not too bad. Okay, so as long as I'm looking like this, I'm safe. And I do have a cooldown of like 1 second, so I can't just keep wailing on the spacebar. There is a little bit where it pops up. So, you know, if you time it wrong and dodge too early, he's going to pop up right when the bullet's, you know, hitting him and die. So there is a little bit of a strategy involved into when you can dodge. Other things I'm probably going to want to do while he's in that duck state. He can still shoot while he's in the duck state. I probably don't want to do that. I also probably don't want him moving in the duck state. So I will do those two things, and then I think that's where I will wrap up. So when let's see, when he is ducked down, then I don't want him to be able to move. What is the expression? If shoot is true, then let's see, that sets variables and whatnot. Okay, so PL shoot, in other words, he hasn't shot, has to be 0 for him to be able to shoot. So the easy way to turn shooting off would be to set that to 1. And let's see, where am I doing that? Step. So if PL shoot is 1, okay, so as long as I set PL shoot to 1, it'll automatically go into this counter to reset it. Unfortunately, the dodge length and the amount of time between shooting bullets might actually be different. So what I think I will do is, let's see, space. Okay, if he is ducking, then I think I will turn at least shoot off. PL shoot, turn that to 1. Actually, I shouldn't do that here. I should do it here. No, I could do them both places. Alright, let's put that back in. So as long as he is ducking, I don't want him to be able to shoot, because there should be a penalty for dodging all the time. So that sets that up. But I also need to make it so that when he pops up, things happen as normal. Actually, it might already be doing that for me. Let me try it. Let me try it. Let's see what happens. It might actually... Yep. Okay, it's actually already fixed, because that shooting logic is already set up so that it resets the counter and everything else. So, you know, you can't see what I'm doing on the keyboard, but while I'm ducked, I'm trying to shoot, but as soon as I pop up, I can shoot again. The next thing is to cancel movement. And where am I doing movement? Left, set the horizontal speed. Okay. So, begin step, setting this to 0. Unfortunately, I want to make sure that he's not moving after all of this. So step, in step. Let's try this anyway. Let's see what happens. I want to copy this. Okay, so again, if he's in the dodge state, then do this stuff. And what do I want to happen if he's in the dodge state? I don't want him to move. Let me figure out what those are again. Set horizontal speed. Okay, so it's just to set horizontal speed to 0. 0. Okay. And vertical speed 0. We'll see what happens. So if he's in the dodge state, he shouldn't be able to move. It should overwrite the left and right keys, but we'll see what happens. Now, unfortunately, that instep is not doing it the way I expected. So let's move this just to step and see what happens. It might still get overwritten by left and right, but we'll see. Nope. Okay, good. Instep is probably, it's too late to do anything when you're in instep, so that's why it wasn't working. But in the actual step, GameMaker has 3 steps. Begin a step, step, and instep. And since I'm doing everything in step and begin step, you know, if I try to stop the player in that end step part, it's too late to have any effect on what's going on in here. But if I move that up to step, he can't move while he's ducked. He can't move, he can't shoot. Well, he can still shoot, unfortunately, but I think that's just a timing issue. I can debug that next time. But I do at least have the beginnings of a dodge mechanic. So when bullets start to fly, the player has a sporting chance, at least, of dodging them. And of course, you know, how long he's dodging and everything else is something that'll get adjusted as we fix gameplay. So going back to the task list, player action dodge, that is done, but I do need to create a debugging event. I'll just call him debug. So shoot while dodging, and I'll call it a bug. And my guess is that it's going to take probably about half an hour at most, I hope, to figure out what that is causing. But I will move that down because that's not a very high priority task. It is a higher priority task than things like sound effects and everything else, so I'll just move it to there. scrunch it in. And it is a game design task, so I'll make it that. Okay. So let's close out GameMaker. And Jim Orion mentions it's nice when the logic pulls double duty like that. Yes, it is. It is very nice. It's actually nice because usually, when you're programming or making games, you expect things to go well and things don't go well. It's nice when once in a while you expect things not to go well and they actually go well. It's much rarer. It feels quite nice. So let's see. What did I do today? Let's move all these to done. So wrapping up, I started out by fixing the collision on the town so that the bullets wouldn't, go flying outside of the map. I created a rough bullet pickup. I created the graphic. That was a short thing, but actually putting the bullet pickup, so that it appears randomly around the screen was quite a bit of work. Having a bad guy when he's shot leave a bullet behind wasn't as much work. And player action dodge was a little bit faster than I was expecting. So that's episode 6. Now let's move that here. And for a sneak preview of what we'll be doing next week, move that over here. Trello is getting a little clunky because I have too many of these card things, but all right. So I think next week, let's get that bad guy shooting. I think that will take the whole episode because I imagine, after the trouble I had with getting pickups and everything to appear and the bullet problem that I've got coming up, that's going to be a show in itself. I probably could squeeze this in. We'll see. In the past, I've been going at about 2.5, theoretical hours worth of tasks per episode. So, we'll go to theory and see. Because the town level win condition, what that's going to be is, after you kill all the enemies, you win. That should be fairly straightforward. So next week will be cowboy action shooting and town level win condition. Let's get rid of that. Let's see, bring this up again. So, thank you for watching. I do appreciate you stopping by. And if you're watching this later on YouTube, I appreciate, any like or hopefully not a dislike, but I hope you like this episode, and I hope you also subscribe because then you can keep track of, what we're doing. And in terms of Twitch TV, which is the live show, I do this every Saturday morning, my time anyway. That's Japan, 8 a.m. For those of you in the States, it should be, let's see, Pacific Daylight Time should be 4 o'clock on Fridays. 5 Mountain, 6 Central, 7 Eastern. For those of you in the UK, it should just be midnight between Friday and Saturday. And for those of you who are here in Japan with me, obviously it's Saturday morning, 8 a.m. In Australia, I believe it's, depending on where you live in Australia, it's probably 9 a.m. to about 11 a.m. And New Zealand, I think it's about noon on Saturday, if you want to catch the live show. I do announce that stuff on Twitter, so if you want to follow me on Twitter, that's just Tengu. And let's see, what else? The site is www.bluetengu.com. That's where I post information about the episodes, as well as, a couple of other articles and things. And also, since I am jumping into summer vacation here for, a week or whatever, I should be able to do a Blue Tengu Unplugged or two as well. So you can actually go over to www.bluetengu.com, and there's going to be a voting form on the site. I basically picked 4 games. You can vote on which one you want to see if you have a preference. Right now those games are Endless Space, Ring Runner, Risk of Rain, and Shadow Warrior. The new one? Yeah, the new one. So, I've got just all those games are in Steam, and, I'm just kind of backlogged because I work and everything else, so I don't usually get much time to play games. So if you want to see one of those games on the next Blue Tengu Unplugged and you have a preference, come on over and vote. So, thank you for watching, and I hope next week I can get the enemy a little more dangerous so that it's not just the player being his own worst enemy. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.